I never thought a new job would feel like a secret I had to keep. But here I am, smiling through meetings while quietly counting the seconds between waves of nausea. Hi, I'm Mia, and this is my story. One that started with hope, but quickly turned into something else. In today's video on Daily Drizzle English, I'll take you through the quiet storms I faced as I started my new job at the bank, while hiding something very personal. If you're learning English, listen closely, not just to the words, but to the feelings behind them. Let's begin. No one at work knew I was pregnant. I didn't want them to. I was only a few weeks in and barely knew their names, let alone their hearts. "Are you okay, Mia? You look a bit pale," someone asked during our Monday meeting. I forced a smile and said, "Just a little tired." The truth? I had just thrown up in the restroom 10 minutes earlier. Every day became a quiet battle between wanting to do well at my new job and the little life growing inside me, reminding me that rest wasn't optional. At first, the tasks were manageable. A few forms, some emails, learning the system. But by week 4, it felt like everything doubled. My supervisor handed me a stack of client profiles and said with a wink, "You're sharp, Mia. You'll figure it out." My heart sank. Sharp? I barely understood half the procedures. I spent lunch breaks watching tutorial videos, praying no one would see my screen and realize I was learning things I was supposed to already know. "You're doing great," they kept telling me. A colleague even brought me tea once. I thought, how kind everyone is. But slowly I noticed things weren't what they seemed. Files I hadn't touched somehow had my name on them. Clients I never met were added to my report list. It hit me during a late evening. "They're pushing their work onto me," I whispered, staring at the spreadsheet. But no one said it. No one admitted it. The praise, it turned out, was a cushion for quiet exploitation. I didn't want to fall behind, so I stayed late, every single night. "You're still here?" the cleaner asked, surprised. "Yes, just wrapping things up," I mumbled. I often stayed until 9 p.m., trying to understand policies, client portfolios, internal tools. My desk lamp became a familiar friend. One night, I found myself tearing up while staring at a client's credit risk report. Not because of the numbers, because I missed dinner, again. Even when I stayed late, my husband always waited. Sometimes in the car, sometimes outside with a hot drink. "You okay?" he'd ask gently. I'd nod, too tired to explain. "You don't have to prove anything, he whispered once. I smiled but didn't answer. I was proving something to myself, that I could still be strong, that I could make this work. By the time we got home, my whole body ached. I barely spoke during dinner. I'd just nod, force a few bites, and lie down. "Did you eat at work?" he'd ask. "A little," I'd lie. I didn't want him to worry, but the truth was the nausea made it hard to eat, and the stress made it harder. One night, I cried in the shower, silently, so he wouldn't hear. It happened on a Wednesday, a high-stakes client meeting. Everyone was there. I was expected to present, even though I hadn't prepared. Someone else had told me they'd handle it. "Mia, go ahead," the manager said. I stood up, heart racing, mind blank. I looked around. No one met my eyes. I realized they had set me up. Whether by accident or not, I was on my own. I opened my mouth and found my voice. I spoke honestly, not perfectly, but enough. After the meeting, my hands trembled, but I had survived it. Later that day, a quiet colleague named Lynn approached me. I saw what happened. It wasn't fair. She sat with me during lunch and shared her own stories. That's when I learned I wasn't alone. "You're not crazy, Mia," she said. "This place, it's tough, but you're tougher." That one moment of connection gave me hope again. So here I am, still in the same job, still fighting little battles, but now with eyes wide open. I've learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just showing up, quietly, every day. If this story felt real to you, if you've ever had to hide your pain or push through when no one sees, stay with me. This is Daily Drizzle English, where we grow through real stories, real words, and real heart. Don't forget to subscribe. You're not alone, and your story matters too. I never thought a new job would come with so many secrets, but here I am, walking into the office every morning with a smile on my face and something quietly growing inside me, something no one else knows. My name is Mia. I'm 30 years old, married, and just 3 months into my new job at a bank. I used to think that once I got this job, everything would fall into place. But the truth? It's more complicated than I ever imagined. In today's story on Daily Drizzle English, I want to share a piece of my life, not just as an English learner, but as someone who is trying to balance work, personal challenges, and quiet battles no one sees. Maybe you felt this too. That silent pressure to act strong, even when everything inside you feels uncertain. That fear of being found out, not for doing something wrong, but for simply being human. My story begins with a simple goal, to do well at my job. But little by little, things started to shift. The work became harder. People were not quite what they seemed, and every day I came home more tired than the last. If you've ever felt overwhelmed at work, or if you're learning English and want to feel more connected through real stories, stay with me. I promise you, this isn't just about stress or mistakes. It's about discovering something much deeper. So take a breath. Let's walk together through the real, honest days of this journey. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest truths. Welcome to Daily Drizzle English, where stories are more than practice. They are a place to feel, to grow, and to find your voice. On my first day at the bank, I wore my best blouse and the softest smile I could manage. No one could tell that just an hour earlier, I had been bent over the bathroom sink, trying to catch my breath after another wave of nausea. You can't let them see, I told myself, dabbing my face with cold water. At this point, no one at work knew I was pregnant, and I wasn't ready to tell them. I was still new, too new to feel safe, too new to be vulnerable. So I hid it. I hid everything. The hardest part wasn't the nausea itself. It was pretending. Pretending I was fine during morning briefings when all I wanted was to close my eyes and lie down. Pretending I was focused during training sessions when my head was spinning and I could barely hear the words coming out of the instructor's mouth. "Are you okay, Mia? You seem a little pale today," one colleague asked, her eyes filled with casual concern. I smiled quickly. "Oh, just didn't sleep well." A lie. But easier than explaining something I wasn't sure how they'd react to. Every smell in the office felt 10 times stronger. The scent of someone's reheated noodles at lunch, the strong perfume of a manager walking past me, even the cleaning spray after someone wiped down a desk. It all made my stomach twist. I started keeping a bottle of mint oil in my pocket, pressing it under my nose when no one was looking. It helped, but not enough. Still, I smiled. I nodded. I took notes. I pushed through. Some mornings I'd stand in the elevator, eyes closed, whispering to myself, "Just make it to lunch. Then we'll see." And then after lunch it became, "Just make it to 5. I divided the day into tiny pieces, like a quiet game of survival. The thing is, when you're new and trying to prove yourself, There's no space to say I'm struggling, especially when no one else can see the reason. But deep inside, I was proud of myself. Every minute I stayed strong, every task I finished, every meeting I sat through without anyone knowing the storm in my body, it all felt like a small victory. I was fighting for two now. And even though I felt alone, I knew why I was doing it. For my child, for our future, for the life I was building, quietly, one tired smile at a time. At first, everything at work seemed manageable. My tasks were simple, like checking client files, organizing documents, and learning the new banking software. I kept telling myself, "You can do this, Mia. Just take it one step at a time." But the calm didn't last long. Within a few weeks, the workload doubled. Suddenly, I was being added to more meetings, asked to assist with more client accounts, and expected to learn complex procedures that no one had fully explained to me. I would sit at my desk, staring at the screen, feeling the pressure build in my chest. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen. Not because I didn't want to work, but because I didn't know where to begin. One Monday morning, my supervisor handed me a thick folder and said with a smile, "These clients have been a bit tricky, but I think you're the right person to handle them." I forced a nod and thanked her, but inside, I panicked. I hadn't even finished reviewing last week's reports, and now I was responsible for something that seemed beyond my level. I remember thinking, why me? Why so soon? But there was no time to ask questions. Everyone seemed busy, and I didn't want to seem incapable. During lunch breaks, I stopped going to the break room. Instead, I stayed at my desk, watching tutorial videos online, trying to teach myself things I should have already known. I kept my headphones in, not just to listen, but to block out the sound of everyone else laughing, talking, connecting. I didn't feel like I belonged yet. I was trying to catch up to people who had been there for years, and I was doing it while hiding morning sickness and pretending everything was fine. One afternoon, I made a small mistake in a client's profile. It wasn't huge, but it delayed a transaction. My heart dropped when I got the email, "Mia, please see me regarding this error." I rushed to fix it, apologized, and promised it wouldn't happen again. My supervisor didn't get angry. She was actually quite calm, but her eyes said something else. Disappointment. I went home that day feeling like I had failed, not just at work, but at being strong, at managing everything perfectly. But I didn't give up. That night, I stayed up reading more about financial procedures, writing down questions I could ask discreetly the next day. I told myself, "You're not weak, Mia. You're just new. And it's okay to learn slowly." Still, the pressure never let up. Each day at work became a silent race. To understand more, to avoid mistakes, to not fall behind. And all the while, I kept the biggest part of my life a secret. At some point, I started to believe that everyone around me was just wonderful. They smiled at me, offered to help, and always said things like, "Don't worry, Mia. We've all been there." I felt so lucky. After everything I had gone through in my previous job, this felt like a dream. A kind team, a supportive environment. Maybe I had finally found the right place. Or so I thought. There was a colleague named Han who often sat beside me. She was warm, soft-spoken, and always seemed to have her work done early. "If you need help with anything, just ask," she once whispered, sliding a stapler toward me. I smiled and nodded, touched by her kindness. And then there was Min, a senior team member, who patted my shoulder and said, "Mia, I know it's overwhelming at first, but you're doing great." Their encouragement felt like a light in the storm. But as the weeks went by, I started noticing something strange. Tasks I didn't remember being assigned suddenly had my name on them. Reports I hadn't seen before landed in my email with messages like, "Thanks for agreeing to finish this, Mia." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe I had forgotten something. But then it kept happening. Quietly, consistently. One day, Han leaned over and said sweetly, "You're fast, right? Can you just help finish this one report? I'm behind on something else." I didn't know how to say no, so I said yes. By the end of that week, I was buried in extra work. My tasks, their tasks, all while trying to learn the system, keep my mistakes down, and survive my pregnancy symptoms in silence. I remember staying late one evening, the office nearly empty, when I opened a file labeled Mia's Revision. It wasn't mine. I hadn't touched it, but someone had used my name to finish it and passed it off quietly. That night, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the computer screen. I felt betrayed. Not because of one person, but because I had let myself believe in something that wasn't real. I had wanted so badly to trust, to belong, that I didn't see the signs. They weren't bad people, I told myself. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe they didn't mean to take advantage. But deep down I knew. It wasn't kindness. It was convenience. And I was the convenient one. Still, I didn't speak up. I didn't complain. I just packed my bag, walked out of the building into the cool night air, and told myself, "You're stronger than this, Mia. You'll figure it out, even if you have to do it alone." I never planned to work late. In fact, I promised myself I wouldn't fall into that pattern again, not after what happened at my last job. But promises are hard to keep when you feel like you're drowning. One evening, as the office started to empty out, I looked at my desk and realized I was only halfway through the day's tasks. Reports, emails, system updates, all piled up. And I still had 2 client accounts to review that someone else had quietly assigned to me. I glanced at the clock. It was already 6:40 p.m. I sighed, opened a new document, and kept typing. The strange thing is, no one asked me to stay. No one told me I had to finish all that work that day. But I felt like if I didn't, I would fall behind and never catch up. So I stayed, night after night. Sometimes I was the last one to leave. The cleaner would give me a tired smile as he wiped the floor around my chair. "Still working, Chi?" he'd say. I'd nod, my eyes still fixed on the screen. Almost done. Each night felt like a test of how much I could take before breaking. I started bringing snacks to keep in my drawer because I never made it home in time for dinner. I scribbled notes into a small notebook, things I didn't understand during the day, and then I'd spend my evenings researching them. Financial terms, client risk levels, approval procedures. I taught myself slowly, piece by piece, in the silence of an empty office. It wasn't just work anymore. It was survival. One Thursday night, I stayed past 9 p.m. I didn't even notice the time until my phone buzzed. It was a message from my husband. "Are you okay?" "I'm outside." I looked up and saw his car headlights through the window. Guilt hit me hard. I grabbed my bag and ran down. When I opened the car door, he smiled gently. "You look tired," he said. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "What am I doing?" I had left my old job because of stress, because of late nights, because it made me sick. And now I was doing the same thing again. The difference? This time, no one forced me. I did it to myself because I didn't want to be seen as weak, because I was scared to ask for help, because I wanted to prove I could handle it all. And maybe I could. But at what cost? Every evening, No matter how late I stayed, he was always there. My husband, waiting outside the bank building, leaning gently against our small silver car, sometimes holding a warm drink, sometimes just his quiet smile. He never complained. Not once. Even when the wind was cold, even when the hours dragged on, he waited for me like a lighthouse, steady and kind, guiding me home through the fog of my exhaustion. One evening, after an especially rough day, I walked out the doors around 8:30 p.m. My legs felt heavy, and my eyes burned from staring at the screen too long. As soon as I saw him, I felt something soften inside me. He opened the passenger door and said softly, "Did you eat anything today?" I shook my head, pressing my lips together. "Too busy," I murmured. He reached behind the seat and handed me a small sandwich. "At least eat something now. I know you don't want me to worry, but I do, every day." In the car, I leaned my head against the window, chewing slowly, silently. He didn't rush me. He never did. We just drove home with the radio on low, a gentle song humming through the speakers. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Other times he would tell me small stories about his day, about the old man he helped at work, or the funny thing someone said at lunch. He never tried to fix things. He just stayed close, letting me know I wasn't alone. There were nights when I cried quietly, staring out at the dark streets, wishing I could tell him everything I was holding inside. The fear, the pressure, the feeling of not being enough. But I didn't want to burden him, so I just whispered, "Thank you for waiting." He squeezed my hand gently and said, "Always." Those drives home became my quiet escape, a space between the chaos of work and the warmth of home, a pause where I could breathe, even if just for a moment. And though I didn't say it out loud, I knew his presence was what kept me going. He didn't need big words or grand gestures. Just by being there, every single night, he reminded me that love doesn't always need to speak. Sometimes it just waits, and waits, and waits until you're ready to come home. Every day after work, I stepped into the car with the same tired breath. My husband would always greet me with a smile and a simple question, "How was today?" And almost every time I gave the same answer, "Busy." I didn't mean to sound distant. I just didn't have the energy to explain everything. The missed lunch, the endless emails, the feeling of being pulled in 5 directions at once. Some days, I didn't even remember how I got through it. It all blurred into one long, quiet storm inside my head. By the time we reached home, my body felt like it was made of stone. I would drag my feet through the front door, drop my bag on the floor, and collapse onto the couch. He would ask, "Dinner now, or do you want to rest first?" I'd always say, "Just a few minutes," and close my eyes. Those few minutes often turned into an hour. When I opened my eyes again, he'd already be setting the table, his face calm, his movements quiet, as if trying not to wake a sleeping bird. At dinner, I barely spoke. I'd pick at the food, taking small bites, nodding when he talked about his day. I wanted to be present, I really did, but my mind was still stuck in spreadsheets, client emails, and that nagging worry I had forgotten something important. He never pressured me to talk. He just sat across from me, eating slowly, giving me the space I didn't know how to ask for. One night, he looked at me and said, "You don't look okay, Mia." I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I just stared at my half-empty plate. Then he said gently, "It's all right to say it's too much, you know." I blinked, and to my surprise, tears rolled down my cheeks. Silent, unstoppable tears. I hadn't even realized how tired I was, not just in my body, but in my soul. That night, after dinner, he made me tea and sat beside me while I wrapped myself in a blanket on the sofa. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and for the first time in days, I let myself be small, be held, be tired. No strength, no masks. Just me. It became a quiet rhythm. Come home. Rest. Eat a little. Say little. Feel everything. And somehow, through all the exhaustion, his quiet care reminded me that even when I had nothing left to give, I was still loved. Still seen. And that, in its own quiet way, gave me the strength to face another day. Every night felt heavier than the one before. As I walked out of the bank building, the city lights seemed too bright, the traffic too loud, the world too fast. But inside me, everything moved in slow motion. My legs ached, my head throbbed, and my chest carried a quiet pressure that never seemed to leave. The moment I sat down in the car, I would exhale deeply like I had been holding my breath all day. My husband would ask softly, "Long day?" And I would just nod. Some days I didn't even have the strength to say yes. Back at home, I moved like a shadow. I'd wash my face, change into soft clothes, and lie on the bed staring at the ceiling. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like emptiness, a tiredness that lived in my bones. Some nights I couldn't even eat. "You need to take care of yourself," my husband would whisper. I knew he was right, but I didn't know how to explain that the tiredness wasn't just physical. It was everything. My mind, my heart, my spirit, they all felt used up. One night I stood in the shower, water running down my face, and I started crying without making a sound. I leaned against the wall and just let it happen. There was no big reason, no dramatic moment, just the quiet weight of doing too much for too long. I thought about work, about hiding my pregnancy, about pretending to be okay when I wasn't. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, "I'm so tired." Not just from work, but from holding it all in. After drying off, I walked into the bedroom. My husband looked up from his book and smiled. "Come here," he said, pulling back the blanket. I climbed into bed, rested my head on his chest, and closed my eyes. The sound of his heartbeat calmed me, slowly, like a soft lullaby. In the silence, I realized something. This was my safe place. Not work. Not my role as a good employee or a strong woman. Just this, lying next to someone who loved me even when I had nothing left. The next morning, I woke up with sore eyes and a heavy heart. But I got dressed. I put on my work badge, and I walked back into the world, carrying my tiredness like a quiet badge of honor. Because even in the exhaustion, I was still standing, still trying, still showing up. And that, I told myself, had to mean something. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day that already felt off from the start. The moment I walked into the office, I sensed something strange. Whispers floated between desks. Glances lingered just a little too long. And then came the meeting. A big one. A high-stakes client discussion with senior managers and 2 external partners. I wasn't supposed to lead anything. I had double-checked the schedule, and another colleague had said they would handle the presentation. So I relaxed, thinking I could finally sit back and observe. But just as the meeting began, my manager looked straight at me and said, "Mia, you can start us off." My breath caught. "Sorry?" I replied, half smiling, unsure if she was joking. "The client case, go ahead and walk us through it," she repeated, her tone firm, expectant. I looked around the table. The person who had promised to prepare this part avoided my eyes. Others looked down at their notes. No one said a word. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the silence. I opened my laptop, hand shaking, praying I could remember the key points from the report. My voice trembled as I began. So, the client in question is currently managing. I don't even remember exactly what I said. Just that I kept talking, trying to sound calm, trying not to let the fear show. My palms were sweaty, my stomach twisted, and my throat felt dry like paper. But somehow I kept going, one sentence after another, explaining numbers, outlining risks, answering questions I wasn't fully prepared for. When the meeting ended, there was a polite round of claps. Someone even said, "Well done, Mia." But the moment I left the room, I rushed to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the tiled wall, trying to understand what had just happened. I had been set up, left to sink or swim in front of people who mattered. And I swam. Barely. But I did. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk, replaying the moment over and over again. The silence, the avoidance, the fake smiles. It wasn't an accident. They had known I wasn't ready, but they let me walk into it anyway. Maybe to test me. Maybe to shift blame. I didn't know. But what I did know was this. I had stood up in the middle of a storm and didn't fall. I found my voice when no one else gave me one. That night, as I left the building, the air felt different. Colder, sharper. But in my chest, there was something else too. Something small, but burning quietly. Strength. Not loud, not obvious, but real. I had been thrown into the fire, and I had walked out of it, still standing. That afternoon, while I was quietly organizing the files on my desk, someone pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. It was Lynn. She was always the quiet one, polite, kind, but never involved in office gossip or small talk. I looked up, a bit surprised. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there watching me with gentle eyes. Then she said softly, "I saw what happened in the meeting today." My fingers froze over the keyboard. I didn't know how to respond. Should I pretend everything was fine? Laugh it off? But before I could say anything, she continued, "You handled it better than most people would have." Her words hit me like a warm breeze after a long, cold day. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. "I wasn't supposed to present," I finally whispered. "I didn't even know until they called my name." Lynn nodded slowly, her eyes full of quiet understanding. "I believe you. And honestly, this isn't the first time something like this has happened here." We ended up talking for almost an hour about the unspoken rules in the office, the people who smiled while shifting their responsibilities onto others, and the pressure to always seem composed even when you're barely holding on. "They did that to me too back when I started," she said. "I thought it was just the way things were. But it's not right." I listened closely, realizing for the first time that I wasn't alone. That behind the polite masks and perfect appearances, others were also struggling, just like me. Lynn told me how she used to cry in the bathroom after meetings, how she stayed late not to get ahead, but just to stay afloat, how she once thought about quitting entirely, but stayed because of one person who took the time to be kind. "Now I try to do the same," she said, "even if it's just by sitting next to someone and saying, 'I see you, I understand.'" My throat tightened. In that moment, it felt like she had reached into my chest and touched the exact spot that hurt the most. Before she left, she looked at me and smiled. "You're not crazy, Mia, and you're definitely not weak. This place is tough. But you're tougher." After she walked away, I sat quietly, feeling something shift inside me. The loneliness that had been sitting heavy on my shoulders began to lift, just a little. That one conversation didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that small moments of truth and connection could still exist, even in places filled with pressure and silence. And sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you, really seeing you, to help you breathe again. So here I am, still in the same job, still sitting at the same desk every morning, still watching the clock tick slowly past 5. But something inside me has changed. I no longer see the polished smiles and kind words at face value. I no longer believe that staying quiet means I'm strong. And I no longer carry the weight of every mistake like it defines who I am. What I do carry now is clarity, not just about the job, but about myself. I've learned that people aren't always as kind as they seem, and sometimes support is just another way of saying, you can take this from me. But I've also learned that not everyone is like that. Some people, like Ling, are quiet lights in a crowded room. Some people wait for you outside every night, holding warm drinks and soft words. Some people remind you in the most ordinary ways that you're not alone, even when everything feels heavy. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep going. Every evening, as I ride home with my husband, watching the city lights blur past the window, I think about the quiet victories, the days I stood up for myself, the moments I stayed true to who I was, the times I said yes, not out of fear, but out of courage. They may be small, but they are mine, and they matter. If you've ever been in a place where you felt unseen, unheard, or overwhelmed, this story's for you. If you've ever had to fake a smile while holding back tears, or stayed quiet to keep the peace, or doubted yourself when you were doing your very best, please remember, you are stronger than you think. You are not invisible, and your story deserves to be told. Thank you for walking with me through this chapter of my life. At Daily Drizzle English, we believe that stories are not just for listening. They are for feeling, for learning, and for growing. So if this story touched something in your heart, stay with us. Subscribe, share it with someone who might need it, and come back for the next chapter. Because every step you take, every word you understand, brings you closer to the future you dream of. And we'll be right here, cheering for you, one story at a time. Maybe you've been there too. Sitting at your desk, pretending everything is fine when your heart feels heavy and your mind is tired. Maybe you've walked home with aching feet and quiet tears, wondering if anyone really sees how hard you're trying. If this story felt close to your own, I hope you know you're not alone. We all have chapters like this where the world feels too fast and our strength feels too small. But even on the hardest days, you're still here, still showing up, still moving forward. And that, my friend, is something worth honoring. If you're learning English, I want to gently remind you, don't rush. Just like in Mia's story, growth happens quietly, through the small choices, the silent courage, the words whispered only to ourselves. Let your English learning be the same. One word, one sentence, one shadowed phrase at a time. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to keep going. So now, take a moment. Go back and shadow a part of today's story, the part that moved you, or made you pause, or felt like your own reflection. Speak it out loud. Feel the rhythm of the words. Let them become yours. This is how we learn, not by memorizing, but by living the language inside real emotions and stories that stay with us. And if this story gave you something, a feeling, a phrase, a little bit of strength, please consider subscribing to Daily Drizzle English. Every video here is crafted to gently guide you forward, to make English part of your heart, not just your memory. Hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who might need it, with and stay close. There's so much more to come. And I promise we'll walk it together, one breath, one word, one heartbeat at a time.